Okay, everybody, hi. Welcome back for our final webinar of the 2020-2021 season. I have actually a bit of a confession to make, is that I started out with the idea of doing one kind of webinar, which was to focus on obscure pieces of great composers and great pieces of obscure composers. But as I went into further looking at how to do that, I sort of pivoted and went into a much more personal review of, instead of looking generally at pieces of that kind, I've gone to a point to maybe in a much more personal view of pieces that have meant the most to me in my development as a musician, as a cellist, as a composer, and as a conductor. And I found, as I was listening to works that I was considering, I was much more attracted and I found much more interesting to talk about pieces that meant more to me individually and personally, to my growth and evolution to become a musician. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. A few of the compositions that influenced me and to spend a life in music. And they're not the war horses or the great pieces that one would necessarily think would be the most impactful in my journey. And I thought I would just share with you some of those pieces and how they came to play such an important part in my evolution to become a musician. And it starts off in a very strange place, actually. It starts out in my story to become a professional musician starts in a very small town in the middle of Hungary. It's called Kecskemét, Hungary. And it's the birthplace of Zoltán Kodály. I've mentioned at various times through my tenure with the Bucks County Symphony Orchestra how important the time that I spent studying the pedagogy technique of Zoltán Kodály was for me. And I just thought I'd go into a little bit more detail today about that. It was between my sophomore and junior years at University of Pennsylvania. And of course, I had gone to Penn not planning to be a musician. I had not, even though I'd played cello in high school, I'd not planned to become a professional musician. And I enjoyed playing music, but I would never considered that it was going to be a profession for me. But a friend of mine who was teaching, who was the music professor at Haverford School in Haverford, Pennsylvania, and who I befriended because a friend of his was in our college orchestra at Penn, was passionate about the Kodály method and the Kodály system. And every summer, he and his Kodály colleagues all across the country and around the world would gather every summer in Kecskemét to attend the Kodály Institute, in which there was a 6 or 8 week session in which Zoltán Kodály's acolytes would instruct people on the Kodály system. And when one of my friend's colleagues dropped out at the last moment, he called me, and I was actually at Ambler at the music festival there, studying conducting with William Smith. That was when the Pittsburgh Orchestra was in session there. And he said, someone dropped out and everything is completely paid for. How would you like to take a trip to Hungary for free? And I thought, wow, how exotic would that be? And he said, well, you would be in the Kodály program. And I said, well, nevertheless, getting a free trip to Hungary and spending the summer in such an exotic place. And remember, this was at a time when the Hungarian people were very much under the thumb of the Soviet occupation. There were Soviet troops stationed throughout the country, even in this tiny little town. And so I went, and it changed my life, because when I was there, I experienced what it was like, what music was like for people who had virtually nothing else, who weren't allowed to travel, who had very little accoutrements of daily life to enjoy, but they had this incredible passion for music, and I was blown away by the artistry and uh, um, the concentration and the of not only the people who were teaching, but here's a picture on the bottom of this a young girls choir who had been taught in the Kodai technique, and we studied mostly the music of Kodai and Bartok. And I remember at one concert there was one piece in which this girl choir performed that just absolutely took my breath away and transported me to a place where I realized that there was such meaning and beauty in music that it's something that I really thought that I needed to reassess and figure out if that's where I wanted my life to lead. And this is the piece of which I'm talking about. It's a short two-piece a cappella work for girls, young women's voices. The title translated means "Don't Leave Me." And just listen to this extraordinary work, and I think you understand why I was so transported to the point of reevaluating what it was that I wanted to do with my life. Well, I had never heard anything as beautiful as this in my entire life. It just went right through my body into my soul and changed how I felt about what music meant to people listening to these young women sing this beautiful music, the simplicity, the exoticness, the strangeness, and the profound, just astonishing beauty of this simple, simple, simple piece. So when I went back to Philadelphia, I changed my major to music. I went into the music department and I said, I'd like to be a music major. And they looked at my transcript and they said, well, you haven't taken any music courses in your first 2 years here. There's no way you can become a music major unless, there's no way you can get enough credits to become a music major unless you take only music courses for your final 2 years here. And that's exactly what I did. And what was so astonishingly fortuitous was on the faculty at that time were three extraordinary gentlemen, George Crumb and George Rochberg, both Pulitzer Prize winning composers, and a gentleman whose name no one would remember or know, a gentleman by the name of Constant Vauquelin. Now, I was able to study composition with George Crumb, which was more like sitting in a room and just learning by osmosis what it's like to be around someone for whom music is such an what was his whole life, and who had such a exotic and very avant-garde take on music. And this was at a time when his great works were just being composed and performed, specifically works like The Ancient Voices of Children and such. And Georg Rothberg, who had an extraordinary life as a composer. Originally, he was, for a long period of his life, a very strict adherent to serial 12-tone music. And then he turned his back on it and became a neo-romantic composer. And I had the good fortune of being able to study music repertoire with him. And yet the person who was the most influential onto me, most influential for me, was a gentleman by the name of Constant Vauquelin, a man of French ancestry who lived in Philadelphia and taught at Curtis, taught at Penn and a number of other schools. And he was our theory teacher. And it was through him that I got an incredible foundation of the building blocks of music that supported all the other education that I was getting. And of course, with Mr. Vauquelin, Professor Vauquelin, our Bible was Johann Sebastian Bach. And of course, there are a million, well, at least thousands of works of Bach that are equally impressive and influential. But for me, as a cellist, I was often playing, since I had a weekly gig playing in a trio sonata at a local French restaurant, we played a lot of trio sonatas, hundreds and hundreds of them, of all the different Baroque composers. But this one by Johann Sebastian Bach, his trio sonata in G major, it's not an unknown work, it's fairly well known, but his trio sonatas are not considered his major works, was a work that just, whenever we came back to it, it was like a ray of sunshine, a breath of fresh air. And we're going to listen a little to it, and then we're going to talk about it a little bit and listen to the rest of it. Here's the beginning of Bach's trio sonata in G major, 2 flutes and continuo. So that's the first half. Let's take a look a little bit at this beautiful piece. Of course, we study a lot of Bach, and you can see the figured bass under the bass line here, and talk a lot about the harmonic elements of this piece. But I'm just going to bring out 3 parts of this piece, and we'll listen to the rest of it, the second half. It's in 2 halves. We just listened to the first half, and each half is in 3 parts. The first part is this melody that's accompanied by this incredible sustained pedal, this long D natural, and then it's handed off to the second flute, this long A natural. And what's extraordinary about using the pedal in music is that even though one note can stay the same, what goes on around it can affect the note, so that the experience of that holding that one note changes as you're holding it. And when we listen to the second half, in which the same thing happens but in a different key, listen to that sustained note, and you'll hear at the end of the sustained note, all of a sudden there's this incredible tension that feels like that note has to move, has to move, has to move, and finally it does. It's an extraordinary compositional device that Bach perfected. And then after this beautiful reiteration with another pedal tone comes this wonderful section of chromaticism that sounds almost 20th century. There's so many incredible rubs of half steps and such that it sounds like it's something that could have been written yesterday. And after that bit, we hear this beautiful series of falling notes of 4 scalar notes, yabba dabba, yabba, overlapping each other in this beautiful cascading waterfall. So let's listen to the second half of this Bach trio sonata. We're going to start at this point, and you'll see everything that we heard, we're going to hear again in the same sequence. We're going to hear the 2 pedal notes, and then we're going to hear the chromaticism, and then we hear the falling, cascading waterfalls of notes until we have a half cadence at the end in the dominant. So we'll begin right here in this third system of this first page and listen to the rest of this beautiful movement. Listen to that D being held. Now it feels like it needs to go someplace, and it does. Back in G major. Top of the next page. Hear the chromaticism and the rubs. And the release of that tension, the falling notes, scales of notes. Not much one can say about that other than its brilliance in a little capsule of 3 pages of music. And the contrast and the tools, the fun foundation tools that he uses, he never surpassed in any other work. But he does duplicate it very often. And I love that last pedal note here at the last system of the second page, the third page of the piece. There's an incredible feeling of tension and then release until the final cadence. So I thought I'd take it from here, just sort of going epic by epic. So this was a Baroque work, and we're going to take a look at a classical work, and then a Romantic work, and then a 20th century work that have had meanings for me at various stages throughout my career. This next piece from the classical period, of course, that would be the time frame of Mozart and Haydn and early Beethoven, etc. I mean, the number of pieces one could choose from are legion. And it shouldn't surprise those of you in the orchestra what piece that I chose, because it's a piece that I brought in a couple of years ago for us to read and have fun in a reading session. And I go back to it because it does represent for me everything that I love in the classical period of music. And it is a movement from the Haydn Symphony number 47. Of course, Haydn wrote 104 symphonies, and the most frequently played are the last 12, the so-called London symphonies. But I just absolutely adore this middle period Haydn symphony. It has some very special things in it. The third movement of which is the famous Minuetto al Roverso, which you play forwards and then backwards. But it's the second movement that I just charms the heck out of me and represents to me sort of the exemplar of what a classical style is. And you'll notice at the beginning of the second movement, the violins are playing exactly the same line, and the viola, cello, and basses are playing exactly the same notes. So it's basically just two parts. We're going to listen to a little bit, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what makes this movement special for me. Here's the beginning of the second movement, Un poco d'adagio cantabile, of Haydn Symphony number 47. And that's the first statement of this variation. And afterwards, as you see in the last measure of music, he begins a variation. We've had the theme presented in 8th notes, and now it's about to be presented in 16th notes. Let's take a little bit of a look at this this piece, and it goes by so seamlessly that one doesn't even notice the most astonishing aspect of this theme and variations. First of all, this entire first part that we've listened to up to this is in 3 parts. In other words, it's an A-B-A form. You'll notice that at the beginning, the violins play the melody, and the cellos and the violas and the basses play the accompaniment. And then after a B section in the middle, it's reversed. The cellos and the violas and the basses play the melody, and the violins play the same accompaniment that the cellos, basses, and violas had before. Et cetera, et cetera. But what's extraordinary about this? It goes by so seamlessly, you don't even notice it. Let's count how the measures of this theme. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. The 2 5-measure phrases. And then you'll see in the B section, it's the same thing, 10 measures in total. And of course, when the A comes back with the cellos and the violas in the bottom, it's 10 measures. In other words, 3 10-measure units. In music, you don't do that. But of course, Haydn is just the composer who thumbs his nose at everybody and gives a little wink and a smile, that we have a theme and a variations in 10-measure units. I just absolutely love that about this piece, whereas 99% of music is in 4/4 and 4-measure units and multiples of 2, 4s, and 8s. Haydn so incredibly seamlessly gives us something just so charming in unit measures of 5 that we don't even think about. So as I said, we have the 16th note variation, and then we have triplet variation, and then we have 32nd note variation. 32nd note variation. So we go through these three different variations until we get and start wrapping things up at the end here. Let's listen to the beautiful finale of this incredible movement. We'll hear the theme iterated once again in the woodwinds with the oboe lead. Here we go. The end of the second movement variation. 2, cellos, basses. And Haydn sneaks the melody into the second violins here. I love that Haydn ends the piece and you have this incredible moment of silence here before the very end where you don't know what's going to happen. That's a classic Haydn joke for you. Just having a moment of silence, everybody's wondering what's he going to do next. And he has that beautiful, simple, simple ending. So the Romantic period. And there's just, once again, there's too many options and such great music to think about a piece that would have more meaning to any one of us than any other piece, whether it's Schumann or Brahms or Wagner or Strauss or Tchaikovsky or Mahler or Bruckner or any of the other great Romantic composers. But I chose a piece that for a different reason, which was there was a point where I needed to feel more comfortable as a more well-rounded musician, and rather than just as a cellist and as a conductor. And so I began taking lessons and practicing piano so that I felt that at least I could have a minimal amount of facility on the keyboard, which would allow me to feel more of a full, more well-rounded musician. And also, it was at a time that I was beginning to look into composing. So it was very important for me to develop some sort of keyboard proficiency. And I like to call myself a mediocre, really bad pianist. But it's just enough so that I can get by and used it as a tool for composing and also for demonstrating simple things as well on the keyboard. And one of the pieces that I studied, and it was in fact the very first piece that I mastered to be able to play on the piano, was one of the great piano miniatures by Johannes Brahms. It's opus 118, number 5. It's the Romance from his collection of piano works from his collection of opus 118. The first piece that I was able to master as a pianist, and it is, I thought I'd pick it as well because we're talking about Romantic period, and it's a romance. What could be more appropriate? And I thought I'd just play you a little bit of this on it, so that you get a sense of the beauty and the simplicity and just the romantic element of how someone could feel that one could demonstrate and be at one with a great romantic composer and play their music on the keyboard. And notice, I love how Brahms is so meticulous with his notation, that there are certain lines where the stems are going up and you can follow them throughout, and certain lines with stems that or go down, and you can follow that all throughout. And in fact, if you look at a Brahms piano piece, it almost orchestrates itself, because he tells you exactly what instruments would be playing. For example, if you're doing this for string orchestra, you could have the bass playing this, the cello playing the tenor line, the viola playing the alto line, and the two violins playing the two soprano lines above. So think about this orchestrationally as you hear this beautiful work by Brahms for piano. And that's the first part of this wonderful 3-part romance. Just being able to master that one page was such a feeling of accomplishment for me, and allowed me to think that, yes, I could potentially become a professional musician if I were well-rounded enough to be able to at least get facility enough to be at the keyboard to be able to play and enjoy such a great piece of music. So on to the 20th century. And of course, once again, there are so many pieces to choose from. I actually almost chose a piece from Stravinsky, but it wasn't the piece that you probably would think, a big, large orchestral piece. It was the solo clarinet, the pieces for a solo clarinet, that just is astonishing work of genius, how to write for a single instrument. But I thought I'd go back to my roots as a cellist and pick a work that emphasizes the strings, but also, in my mind, also represents what the gritty and almost aggressive element of 20th century music could be, that shows as much a contrast to the music the piece that you just heard as you could possibly imagine. And to do that, one need only go to the string quartets of Bela Bartok. And I'm going to play you the first part of a movement, the fifth movement from his string quartet number 4, which to me, when I heard it for the first time, just exploded my world in terms of what the possibilities of composition could entail. Not only orally in terms of what you hear, but actually how you put the music together, actually literally in terms of notation and such. So you might want to adjust your volume, because here comes the beginning of the fifth movement of the Bartok String Quartet number 4. And if you've never heard of this, hold on to your horses. Here we go. Well, it feels like your guts just been torn out from you, right? I mean, the aggressiveness and the visceral nature of this music, it just, it just sparks flying everywhere. I don't think there's any music of this entire past century that matches the excitement and the extraordinary energy of this particular quartet, not only this movement of which you just heard the first part, but the entire piece. And yet he was also a composer of a great intellect as well as a great viscera, and the combination of the two, and the challenge, the technical challenge for the players, not only their individual parts, but to keep the parts together, is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. And I thought I'd do one more work from the 20th century, a contrast to this Bartok. As you all know, I have a great love for not only classical music, but other kinds of music as well. And many of you know specifically what we call classic jazz, and more specifically, the music of Duke Ellington. And there's so many recordings and compositions of which to look at. But I thought I'd share one that I spent great deal of time studying and listening to, because its beauty and its extraordinary nature of how he combines not only jazz but other kinds of influences just makes so much of a difference in how I listen to jazz and non-classical music. And I thought I'd share this beautiful, beautiful version of Duke's song Come Sunday, which in its original goes something like this. that's the beginning of Come Sunday. The most famous version of this is the one with Mahalia Jackson singing the lyrics. And yet there's another version of it in which there's Duke Ellington's fourth trumpet player, a gentleman by the name of Ray Nance, who also played violin, does a solo version of this, and a more beautiful version of a string player playing jazz I don't think one can find. Here is Ray Nance and the Duke Ellington Orchestra playing Duke Ellington's Come Sunday. Well, I don't think there's a better way to end reverentially. A little survey of music that meant the most to me in my life as a musician. Bartók work for three-voice choir, a Bach trio sonata, a Haydn symphony, a Brahms piano romance, a Bartok string quartet, and a beautiful work by Duke Ellington. Sort of encapsulates what music means to me, and how I began and had and continue to have this journey, which I look forward to continuing with all of you next year.